Welcome to Passages Pulse, where we track the heartbeat of Israel and the Middle East from a Christian perspective. In a time of confusion, division, and misinformation, we're here to help you cut through the noise with truth, clarity, and conviction. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Passages Pulse. And today we have a very important episode, I think. Today is Wednesday, November 5th, 2025. It's November already. I hope you had a good Halloween, a good Reformation Day celebration, if you do that. My name is Sebastian. I'm here with my colleague, Josiah. Josiah, how was your Halloween/Reformation Day?
Well, I got sick, so it wasn't the most fun I've ever had, but it was a restful weekend. Perhaps forced rest, but still, it was nice.
Well, I continue to appeal to our audience. Please let us know in the comments, what was your costume? If you have any fun ones, any biblical ones, I think that'd be really great to share. Today's episode, we're going to talk about a debate that started last week. It was a debate among conservatives about how to respond to my good old friend, Tucker Carlson. He chose to interview basically a white supremacist, Nick Fuentes, whom we're going to talk about here. Josiah's going to tell us who this guy is. Kevin Roberts, he is over at the Heritage Foundation. He came out with a video arguing against canceling Fuentes while arguing that lines must be drawn to defend conservatism. So it's not a surprise that Israel, and the Jews were brought into the conversation. It's funny how from COVID to Charlie Kirk's assassination, anti-Semites always find Israel a reason to hate on Israel and to blame the Jews. So Israel was tangled up in this again. And today we'll wrestle on how Christians should respond to these divides. At the end of this episode, towards the end of the episode, I want to tell you a historical parallel. We've been here before. This is not new. I want to take you back to probably most of us were born in the 1991 when a similar situation happened. And I think we can learn a lot from that. So stick with us until the end because I think that's very interesting. So Josiah, let's start by explaining why this is a big deal. Who is this guy, Nick Fuentes, and what did Carlson's interview with him signal towards the greater audience?
Yeah, well, if you're not familiar with Nick Fuentes, good for you. That's probably a positive because he's a pretty dangerous individual who has a lot of very horrible, dark things to say, actually. But for the purpose of this conversation, just a bit of background is probably helpful. He is a young, I believe he's still in his 20s. He's born in the late 90s, if I understand correctly. Very influential far right-wing, I should say, thought leader of sorts. He styles himself as a influencer, very large following on YouTube, for example, a lot of streaming, a lot of podcasting. And he is a white supremacist. He's a neo-Nazi, which is ironic given his background. His background is not what you would expect of a white supremacist, mixed ethnic background, actually, but he is, for all intents and purposes, a white supremacist and a neo-Nazi. He has very extreme views on a variety of issues, everything from racism to sexism to misogyny, horrifying statements about women, to Holocaust denial, anti-Semitism, on and on and on. Just a wide array of very dangerous views, which are traditionally associated with the alt-right or the very far reaches of the fringes of the extremes of the right wing. And he also has, I think, a large fan club. Part of the reason why this interview happened is because he represents something that is happening among young men, especially in the right wing of American politics, who are becoming increasingly cynical, increasingly susceptible to conspiracy theories that help to explain why they have encountered the struggles that they have in the 21st century. And it's a very passionate movement that has sort of been growing among young men around individuals like him who are going to peddle these lies, conspiracy theories, or very hateful ideologies as a solution to their problems. Now, Tucker Carlson, I should say, in terms of the signal that his interview sends, it's really not all that surprising to me that Tucker Carlson would eventually reach the point where he interviews someone like Nick Fuentes. He has been dabbling in conspiracy theories of his own, a wide variety. We've covered some of that in previous episodes of the Passages Pulse. He also is an individual known for promoting things like Holocaust denial, which is also a very favorite topic of Nick Fuentes. He engages in various kinds of anti-Semitism and increasingly has become a part of this far right that is so far right that even the the far right, or what used to be considered far right, is now not far enough to the right for Tucker Carlson, which has been a fascinating journey to watch him undergo over the last decade, more or less, is when things started to kind of unravel a little bit. But you have to understand that it's not all that surprising again for Tucker to go down this route of interviewing Fuentes. What is surprising is for other organizations and their reaction to this interview to be hesitant to call him out for giving the interview. That is what I think surprised people a little bit more so. And what was disappointing is that you have flagship conservative institutions, most specifically in this case, it was the Heritage Foundation, that did eventually get to the point where they responded and explained what makes Fuentes so bad. But the initial response was not that. It was more so a defense of or a justification of the idea that Tucker should be allowed to interview whoever he wants. And that I think is surprising because it is inconsistent with the history of the Heritage Project. It's also inconsistent with many of the current projects of the Heritage Foundation, like the Esther Project, for example, and what they have stood for in the past and even claim to stand for today doesn't really align with Tucker Carlson or Fuentes. So for them to hesitate to call them out over the things that were said during that interview, it just surprised a lot of people and called into question, why.
Well, like you said, I'm glad that I hope that many of our listeners did not know us about this guy as much as you had to research to learn about him. I have a little comment here, and this is just my pop culture psychoanalyst. This guy is half Mexican. His name is Nicolas Fuentes. I think this guy is just a self-hating guy. Like, I think he's obsessed with this white supremacist thing, and I think he hates himself for not being pure enough. And he's so loud because he hates himself, and it's really sorry. I'm not happy about that. I'm truly sorry. This guy is truly sick, and I believe you're going to show us a little clip later. He has said some terrible things. I would encourage people to go and see. Ben Shapiro did a podcast episode about it earlier on Monday, where he shows a lot of clips from this guy. He's truly scary. But let's talk about how the Heritage Foundation became involved in this now. So Heritage Foundation is a conservative organization. The leader over there right now is Kevin Roberts, who came out with a video statement, and he was talking about the idea of cancel culture. He was trying to defend Tucker Carlson for hosting Nick Fuentes, saying we should not cancel this guy. He was trying to come out against cancellation culture, but not against anti-Semitism. So Josiah, what do you think Kevin Roberts was trying to communicate with this video that has got him in a lot of trouble?
Yeah, it's a good question, and I think I understand why people are very frustrated with that video. I do want to take just a moment to state that while I don't agree with a lot of what the video said, I do want to give him the benefit of the doubt and try to understand what he was trying to communicate, because there have been multiple statements or even a speech at Hillsdale College now made trying to sort of explain what was the intent behind that video. And based on the follow-up statements, it seems like his intent really was to make a point about cancel culture. Kevin was trying to make the argument essentially that ignoring Fuentes doesn't actually diminish his influence, and only makes him stronger. It makes people more curious, and it leaves a vacuum where people are curious about him but don't have access to an alternative narrative that attempts to discredit Fuentes. So basically his point was you have to engage him directly if you're going to defeat his ideas. You can't just pretend he doesn't exist, hope he's going to go away. No, if you want to defeat his ideas, you have to invite him to a debate and then debate him head on about what he believes and confront his views. Now, I think the challenge in this situation, and where I do have something to quibble over regarding the video that Kevin put out, his first video that he put out about this issue, is that Tucker's interview wasn't really that kind of interview. It wasn't the kind of interview where you invite someone on to hear their ideas and then you challenge them to explain those ideas or to justify them or even push them to change your mind about certain issues. It was a pretty friendly interview. It was a platform given to Fuentes to share his views, and Tucker either agreed with some of what he said or didn't really disagree vocally or challenge him on much, if anything, of what Nick had to say during that interview. So that's not really what happened. What Kevin was trying to defend, a debate of ideas, in my mind, that's not really what happened when Tucker interviewed Fuentes. It was a friendly interview instead that gave him a platform to spread his pretty hateful ideas. Now, I also want to note that while Kevin did not initially focus his remarks or response on what makes Fuentes especially dangerous, he did do so later. Now, I think what disappointed some people was that he didn't do so right away. It took him, 2 or 3 statements before he got around to explaining why Fuentes' ideas need to be challenged head on and why they are, in fact, so dangerous.
Yeah. Let's keep going because I have a lot to say, but I want to save it for later. So, Josiah, I mean, I will say one thing here. I think the issue about cancel culture, like nobody's talking about that. Like I think I've listened to some of the most pro-Israel, pro-Jewish people in the country, loudest voices, like people from Commentary Magazine, from National Review. Nobody's calling for Tucker Carlson to be canceled. As of, like, cancellation, let's define it for a second. I think it's when like a Hollywood actor is found to have committed a sexual assault or some terrible crime like that, and they're canceled. Like their shows are taken down from platforms. People stop watching their movies, things like that. Nobody's calling for Tucker Carlson to be canceled that way, or for people like Nick Fuentes to be canceled that way. It's just that they need to be treated appropriately. They later on, I'll allude that one of the ways that we should deal with them is by not taking them seriously. They're not serious people. It's like Candace Owens; she's not serious, and we need to respond to their hate speech with more speech. But nobody's talking about this, like taking away their platforms or anything like that. But let's continue because, like I said earlier, Israel was dragged into all this. Of course, Nick Fuentes, huge anti-Semite. Tucker Carlson, very anti-Israel person. How did Israel become entangled into all this, Josiah?
Well, I think it's been unfortunate that it's been dragged into it because it's not actually at the crux of the matter from my perspective. It's basically a pawn that's been used as a wedge issue to divide conservatives. And there is a war among conservatives or among the political right in the United States that's been ongoing. And again, we've discussed this in previous episodes. So it's not surprising in that sense that Israel's being used as a wedge issue, both because there was this war and because it has been the wedge issue used in the past cycles of this intra conflict between the political right. But I think it is very unfortunate evidence of ongoing anti-Semitism in the way that individuals like Tucker Carlson or Nick Fuentes intentionally infuse it into this debate or conflict over the nature of conservatism in the United States today. There are, I think, various straw man arguments that you'll see thrown around that try to cloud or distract from what the issue really is about in terms of how people have responded to Nick Fuentes and Tucker Carlson. So I'll give you a couple examples. In some of the reactions to the interview and to what Heritage had to say, there was some stuff coming out, some various arguments that basically, people disagree with Tucker Carlson or Nick Fuentes because they criticize Israel. They're asking the Heritage Foundation to, drop its sponsorship, for example, of Tucker Carlson because he criticizes Israel or because he hosts Nick, who's also critical of Israel. And to be fair, Tucker Carlson is more than critical of Israel. I mean, he openly declared recently, I think in that interview with Fuentes, that he hates Christian Zionists. He's using some pretty strong language of his own there. Right. I mean, so it's a little bit more than just that he's critical of Israel. But I think even that is not really the crux of the matter, because if you take a step back and think about it, Charlie Kirk, for example, would probably call himself a Christian Zionist, a Christian who supports the existence of the state of Israel. He at times was critical of Israel. Nick Fuentes just put Charlie on blast multiple times for not being critical enough of Israel or for continuing to support Israel's existence and the U.S.-Israel relationship, despite the fact that Charlie was at times critical of Israel. So to argue that it's just about securing, more rights for people to be critical of Israel or more nuanced about Israel, I don't think that's a good faith argument. I think that's a distraction from a bigger issue here, because if that were the case, then Fuentes would have had a very different relationship with someone like Charlie Kirk over this issue. I also think that it's, again, not really the crux of the matter, because many Christian Zionists are also able to be critical of Israel. It's not just people like Charlie Kirk, for example. I mean, I consider myself a Christian Zionist. I can criticize Israel. I've done so on this podcast. Sebastian, I think you have done the same at various points. So that's not really the point. The point is that Fuentes is a very bad person. Israel being used as sort of this scapegoat or this, flashy object to distract us from the real issue is being used as a pawn, because at the end of the day, what really the issue that people have is not just that he criticizes Israel occasionally, but that he's a very bad person with horrible views on a wide variety of positions, has terrible views on women. He is a racist. He openly denies that the Holocaust happened or celebrates it, thinks Hitler was a cool guy. He calls for the death penalty against people that he disagrees with. I mean, I'll go ahead and play a clip here. This was also, I think, on that Ben Shapiro episode that you mentioned, Sebastian, but it's good for our listeners to hear straight from Fuentes who he is. Yes, this is not pleasant to listen to. It's going to be about 30 seconds if you want to fast forward this. But if you want to hear direct from Fuentes just how horrible his views are, we'll give you an opportunity to do that.
There is an occult element at the high levels of society, and specifically among the Jews. So many of the people that are perpetrating the lies and the destruction on the country, they are evildoers. They are people that worship false gods. They are people that practice magic or rituals or whatever. And more than anything, those people need to be, when we take power, they need to be given the death penalty. Straight up. And I'm far more concerned about that than I am about even non-white people or mass migration. These people that are communing with demons and engaging in this sort of witchcraft and stuff, and these people that are suppressing the name Christ and
so you can hear here, he's also going to unfortunately invoke the name of Christ, of Jesus, in order to justify his really horrific views. But if you listen closely to what he's saying, you're going to hear a few common themes, accusations of demon possession, of the occult, of witchcraft, all of which are classic anti-Semitic tropes. He's going to refer to the elite of society, especially the Jews, as being the type of people who are controlled by these things and are, destroying our country and our lives, all sorts of things. Again, all these are very classic anti-Semitic tropes, but he's using these to describe more than just the Jews, but people who disagree with him or his views, people who do not share his ideology, our enemies, our political opponents are going to have to be given the death penalty in the name of Christ, which is so incredibly evil and ironic that I think we have to hear it in order to believe it. But at the end of the day, I think that the point I'm trying to make is that if anyone tells you that it's just about people being more aware, or people having access to more information, or people being allowed to ask questions or criticize Israel because we have a right to do that, that's not at all what he's actually about. And that's not why conservatives have a problem with Nick Fuentes. We have much bigger problems with Nick Fuentes because he has an incredibly destructive and evil ideology that unfortunately is co-opting the name of Christianity in order to gain some influence. And that's something that we have to wrestle with very, very immediately, I think.
Yeah, this reminds me of, unfortunately, of there's something that's always stuck with me of, let me not say his name. Some people don't like to say the names of mass shooters because they don't want to give them more fame. There is a mass shooter who shot some Jewish people at a synagogue in San Diego some years ago, and he killed one of the persons there that I knew, a person that had helped me out in my work reaching out to Christians for Israel and the Jewish people. She was awesome, and this guy killed her, and he left a manifesto, and in his manifesto he talks about how he did this because Jesus demands this of him or something like that. He said, who inspires you? He said, Hitler and Jesus and the Apostle Paul. So we've seen that people are able to take the name of Christ and use it for terrible things, from the Inquisition to the genocide of Native Americans. And I think this guy, I just feel pity for him. He is a hateful person. He might not even believe everything he's saying. He's probably might just be saying all of this for fame. And by the way, I think that's why Tucker Carlson had it on his episode, because they just had to be doing crazier and crazier things in order to, because he's not part of the mainstream. He's not a serious person. He is not respected. And he has to keep inviting crazier and crazier people to his podcast in order to get views. And you'll notice also, I have a lot of random things to say about this. Another random thing is, notice how he didn't push back on Nick Fuentes. If y'all watch that interview, Tucker is talking to Nick Fuentes, and Nick Fuentes is like, I'm a huge fan of Stalin, who is responsible for the death of millions of people, millions, more than Hitler. And Tucker's like, oh, okay, well, we can just circle back to that later. But y'all remember how he questioned Ted Cruz when Ted Cruz couldn't remember a Bible verse? So he will question people when he wants, but then he'll let it slide when it's not convenient. And I think this is why Tucker Carlson is not a serious person. He is a grifter and he's deceitful and he's dangerous for America. So anyways, I want to say something before we move on regarding the Heritage Foundation. If y'all, I believe that organizations are more important than people. People come and go, organizations remain. And I think the Heritage Foundation has some really good resources actually on anti-Semitism. If y'all look to the resources page, they have some really good articles that have been published on the problem of anti-Semitism in America. So this organization is not anti-Israel or anti-Jewish. In fact, let's talk about how we as Christians should respond to all this. And let us start by somebody that we're very proud to have as our board member. Passages in Nonprofit, we have a group of non-members, and John Coleman is one of our members. In the notes of this show, we're going to include a link to a tweet that he posted on X, as they call it now. He tweeted how we should reject anti-Semitism because of who Jesus is. Jesus is the Lion of the, these are not John's words, these are my words now. Jesus is the Lion of the tribe of Judah. He is the shoot of Jesse. He is the son of David. He's the son of God, the God of Israel. He came in Jewish flesh. He came with a Jewish name to a Jewish family, and he came to the Jewish people first. And because of that, in different words, John, our board member, encourages people who, by the way, I forgot to say, John Coleman is also on the board of Heritage Foundation. So he's on our board as Passages, and he's on the board of Heritage, which is important for this conversation. He shared his thoughts that faithful Christians should never be anti-Semitic, not because we share the same faith as Jewish people, although we share the same heritage, but because of who Jesus was and how the Bible calls us to respect our spiritual forefathers. The Jewish people are the roots of our faith. We said this many times, and we'll keep saying it forever, that they are the roots, we're the branches. The roots support the branches. And people like Tucker Carlson, in his theology, and this guy, Nick Fuentes, who claims to be a Christian, they are severing themselves from the Jewishness of our faith, which is how it is presented in the Bible. So that was one of our board members who responded by taking a stand against it. Josiah, tell us about how else Christians should respond to this and how we should draw a line against this.
Yeah, and in a moment, I'll share another tweet that I read that I found particularly helpful in addition to John's. I think I just want to reflect on John's for a moment and offer one more thought that I had, is that a lot of what you saw after the Tucker interview with Fuentes was this attempt to sort of whitewash who Fuentes is, what he represents, who Tucker has become, what he represents, as just a slightly more critical of Israel version of, Christian conservative, that sort of thing. And I think that's a mistake, because what it does is it lays a trap and basically argues it is, if you were just a little bit more critical of Israel too, if you were just a little bit less supportive of Israel, then we could all get along because we're really the same. And I think that's a huge mistake. One, because there is so much about what Tucker and Nick represent that is bigger than just Israel, that we cannot get on the same page about, or we cannot agree with. But also because it would be a mistake, I think, to sell away support for Israel just for the sake of getting along with someone like Tucker or Fuentes. So for me, I think one of the takeaways is, again, as a Christian Zionist, I do think it is acceptable and important at times to criticize Israel, but I don't want the person telling me how to criticize Israel to be someone like Tucker or Fuentes, because that's a trap. That's an attempt to distract from what they really care about or what their real ideology or purpose is. The second thing I want to say, as far as another tweet that I heard that I think helps me think about how to respond to this whole situation, there was another Heritage Board member by the name of Professor Robert George. He is a McCormick professor at Princeton University. Wonderful guy. I think really a giant of the conservative movement today and a champion of free speech. And I thought it was really interesting what he had to say about this idea of cancel culture. He basically argued that drawing lines about who we associate with or who we do not associate with is not the same thing as canceling someone, nor is it a violation of their free speech. And he's consistently argued for many years that even the worst people should have the right to free speech respected and upheld. They should have the ability to voice their opinions. But it was meaningful, I think, for someone like him who is so principled on that issue to come out and say, that doesn't mean that you associate yourselves with them or that you allow their speech to go without an answer. You should have something to say in response to what they have to say about whether you agree with them or not. And it's necessary in his perspective to draw lines in the sand, essentially, about who is and is not part of the conservative movement of faithful Christianity in order to protect our integrity about who we are, what we believe, what our principles are, but also to protect our commitment to honor the Imago Dei, the image of God in every other created human being, and the human dignity that they deserve or are granted as such. Really, a very powerful tweet, I thought, from Professor George. Would encourage you to read that because it really, I think, makes a very clear case that we can respect the right of someone like Fuentes to speak without having to agree with him or without allowing people to think that we associate ourselves with him just because the First Amendment exists. So just wanted to throw it out there.
Thank you. I'm so grateful for these people. I'm so grateful for John, who's on our board. Now, Christians, like I just said earlier, this guy who came up and shot a synagogue in San Diego like 6 years ago, he'd say he did this in the name of Christ. This guy, Nick Fuentes, he claims to be a Christian, and he says that this is what Christians should do. This theocracy, Christian nationalism type of thing. So, Christian, the question is, what are you going to do about that? What are we going to do? And I mentioned at the beginning that I wanted to bring up a historical parallel that I think can be very helpful for this era. Basically, what we have right now is people like Tucker, who has said, even most recently, when Israel and the United States attacked Iran, that Israel and Christian Zionists, I guess, were dragging America into a war where American lives will be lost for the sake of Israel. He's trying to say that Israel's interests and American interests do not align. And this is actually not new. This is a criticism. By the way, it's a valid criticism. I don't think it's anti-Semitic to say that. It's a valid criticism. I think it is anti-Semitic when some people go too far with it. So in 1991, America was bringing a coalition of like 30 nations to go at war against Saddam Hussein, who had invaded Kuwait. And at that moment, there was also a presidential election. So there was a candidate, a Republican candidate from the right, a conservative guy, who was serving the Reagan administration. His name was Pat Buchanan. He had some anti-Semitic views, and I want to read them here really quick. You'll see that he sounded a lot like Candace Owens. For instance, he said that he downplayed the Holocaust. He said that at Treblinka, it was impossible that people could have died because gases cannot kill that many people, when research has shown that about 900,000 Jews were murdered at Treblinka alone. And I know many of our listeners, our audience, have been there, and you know this is true. He also said, Buchanan, again, this is the Republican candidate for the presidency at that point, he said, Capitol Hill is an Israeli-occupied territory. So this guy was, he was running for the nomination. He was not the official Republican candidate. He was challenging the sitting president, George H.W. Bush Sr. He didn't get the nomination. And he just happened to have these anti-Semitic views. So that was a problem. And how did Republicans, conservatives respond? I think one response is encouraging from that era. And it was the editor of the National Review, a guy whose last name is Buckley. He wrote a 40,000-word essay against this guy, who is now a book. The book is called In Search of Anti-Semitism. And he basically rebukes him. This guy, Buckley, the editor of the National Review, was a Catholic guy. And he talked about the gospel, how it is impossible for Christians to be anti-Semitic, and how the gospel compels us to stand up against anti-Semitism. He was kind of soft on Buchanan's views. He said that Buckley said, I don't think Buchanan is anti-Semitic. I just think he says anti-Semitic things. But he said that those anti-Semitic things he has said disqualify him from public office. I really appreciate the courage of this conservative powerhouse, Buckley, to stand up to anti-Semitism that has showed its face in the race for the Republican nomination. And I think what I'm calling for is for us to continue to carry that baton, to stand up against anti-Semitic views. I think I'm really concerned about the downplaying of anti-Semitism or even the platform of anti-Semitism that uh, um, Tucker Carlson has done here, that we cannot allow this to happen. I think most Christians find a political home in the Conservative Party, and I think we need to stand up against it and learn from people like Buckley, who took a firm stand against it. I'm glad for our board member like John, who has taken a firm stance, and I'm worried, and with this I'll end, about the next presidential candidate, which, we're years away from that. But Nick Fuentes insulted J.D. Vance's wife. He insulted her for not being white, for not being Christian or Catholic, and J.D. Vance has said nothing about it. And I think it's because a lot of Republican politicians today feel like they need, for electoral purposes, the little constituency that Tucker Carlson and Nick Fuentes and Candace Owen brings along. And I think we need to reject that. I think politicians are not only there to win elections, I think they need to be leaders. And I think they need to deny anti-Semitism and educate people and bring people along, not just go where the people are, but bring the people along and educate them and be leaders of them. So in conclusion, we should pray to not grow arrogant against the roots of our faith, because the Jewish people are our roots and we are the branches, and they sustain us, not us them. Josiah, what are your final thoughts on all this?
I think just a couple things I'll throw in here at the end. Number one, I think this is a bit of an inflection point, I think, for many conservatives. Many conservatives are calling it such, because for years there's been this easy, tendency on the right. I say easy because there's multiple opportunities given to criticize the left of American politics for harboring anti-Semitism on its extremes and for not calling it out and dealing with it appropriately. Now, there is an obvious case of it growing on the right wing of American politics, and there's an opportunity being given to call it out and to deal with it appropriately. And I think we need to do that. I do consider myself to be, a conservative, and this is an opportunity that we have to take in order to call it out, deal with it appropriately. And if we don't do that, then you forfeit a lot of the moral and the intellectual credibility that we're trying to claim by calling out people on the left over this very same issue. The other thing I would say is that I also think it's very important that we are praying about how we move forward over the next few weeks and months and years. I think we need to be grateful that there are people who are taking a stand. We need to be thanking God for them, praying for them to be patient and steadfast and to continue doing that. I also think we need to be praying for the souls of many young men, because what's happening on the far right of American politics today is not just a political earthquake, essentially. It's a spiritual crisis. I mean, you listen to the kinds of things that Fuentes is saying in the name of Christ, or claiming in the name of Christ, and the only way to comprehend that, I think, or to portray that accurately, is it's a spiritual crisis. There are souls which are at stake. So I think we need to be praying for those people who are tempted by what people like Fuentes are selling, not just taking a stand for what is right, but also trying to engage people who are very, very lost and in need of some hope right now. So those are the two things that I think I would be praying for after a conversation like this.
That is so good, Josiah. I wasn't going to go there, but as you were talking, I thought about Jesus' humble spirit. What I noticed in this young man that you mentioned is just a lot of arrogance, a lot of pride, a lot of like wanting to be affirmed as like the people who should be empowered, and everybody else who's not them don't matter. But what we see in Jesus is a savior who became man, being God, became man, and fully God, fully man, served, washed the disciples' feet, fed the masses, healed the sick, touched the lepers and healed them. He was so humble, and he encouraged even pastors. Peter says, shepherd the flock that is among you. So not above or under you, but among you. So among the people. So anyways, I think Jesus' example is one of humility and love. And these people who claim to be Christians by spreading such hate, I think, are far, far from the example of Christ. So let us pray for young men. That's a great point, Josiah. Thank you all for watching. Thank you all, because I know many of you stand up to anti-Semitism. You gather your communities, your churches, you educate your college campuses. Thank you for being our partners. And as we get ready for another travel season to Israel this winter, I'm excited to have even more of you become our alumni and continue to join us as we uphold biblical values. Thank you all, and we'll see you next week in the Passages Pulse. Thank you for listening to this week's episode of Passages Pulse. Help us grow this community by liking, sharing, and subscribing. If you liked this week's episode, let us know by leaving a comment below. This podcast is a project of Passages Israel. We exist to educate the next generation of Christians on modern Israel, deepen the roots of their faith, and equip leaders to foster positive Christian engagement with Israel and the Jewish people. To learn more about Passages, follow us on social media or visit us at passagesisrael.org. Until next time, we'll keep our finger on the pulse.